Okay, I'd like to call to order the March 20th Finance and Performance Management Committee meeting. Do we have anyone for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, if I could just have Debbie Woodward, our IT manager, just quickly tell you that you're live on camera. Tell them what's going on.
Sure. Good morning, committee.
Good morning.
And special guest. My name is Deborah Woodward. I am the Director of IT at PSTA. I would like to let you know that as of earlier this week, we have live streaming video on our committee meetings. So smile, be careful what you say, because it is out there right now as you speak.
All right.
So good luck today.
Thank you. The world gets fancy all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at the January 21st meeting minutes? Or are there any additions or corrections?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Passes? All right. Debbie Leos is going to give us a 2014 audit report.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be introducing Laura Brock and Amy Barnum from Mayor Hoffman McCann. They are auditors. And you've now completed the audit for this year, including the CAFR. And I'm going to have them do a nice little presentation on how we did this year. Turn it over to you, Laura.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Good.
You should have a handout, as well as this was emailed to you or sent to you earlier last week, but it's kind of nice to have something to write on or so forth. But my name is Laura Brock, and I'm a partner with Mayor Hoffman McCann, and as Debbie indicated, Amy Barnum is with me, the audit manager, who's worked on this engagement for the last couple of years to present the results of the 2014 audit. So, turning to page 2. The financial statements, the comprehensive annual financial report, referred to as the CAFR, is very extensive. There's a lot of information in it. I know you may not have had the opportunity to read it from cover to cover, but I would certainly hope that you would read the MD&A, the Management Discussion and Analysis. It's got a lot of good information in there. And now that you have submitted to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, we've got a lot of statistical information in the back of the report, which is extremely helpful. So if you remember a year ago, you made the decision that you wanted to submit your CAFR first time for the GFOA award, and it involved quite a lot of work from your staff internally to get the statistical information, because you're required to provide 10 years worth of data for several economic, financial indicators, all these types of things. So they worked very hard. They submitted the 2013 CAFR, and they were very pleased, as we were, that they had received the Certificate of Achievement Award, which was excellent, because oftentimes first-time submissions are not given that award. So having said that, we have prepared or worked with management for the 2014 audit, which is what I'm here to discuss with you today, and that one will be submitted as well. So now you've started a history and a trend. I have several other municipalities that I audit, and they can say we've gotten a certificate for 23 years or 15 years or 30 years, and so we're starting that track now. So you've got 1 year under your belt, so I'm very excited about that. But it did involve quite a bit of work and effort to put that together, and kudos to the staff for doing that. So the auditor's report on the statements is an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, so that's the best opinion that you can get. The MD&A, which I discussed earlier, that, just to remind you, is unaudited, because that's something that's prepared internally. We do go through it and kind of tie out the numbers to make things sure right, but that's something that's written by you. The financial statements include the statements of net position, the statement of revenue and expenses and changes, cash flows, and then there's quite a few footnotes in those financial statements, which are all required under the government accounting standards principles. So there's quite a few footnotes that we have to get supporting documentation that staff has to put together. There's required supplementary information that's also included, and to remind you, in our opinion letter states this as well, that that's unaudited, but you're required to put some disclosure in there relative to OPEB and some other items. And then the statistical section, so that's what I was referring to, that's in the back of the report. Turning to page 3, so the regulatory items are, in addition to the financial statement opinion letter that we provide, we are also required to provide an independent auditor's report on internal control of our financial reporting and compliance. You receive a lot of federal and state funding that requires you to have an additional compliance audit. We bundle that with the financial audit, and thus they refer that to as the single audit, and we have to provide you with additional report letters. So the one is the independent report on internal controls, schedule of findings and question costs. We also have to have a schedule of expenditures of federal awards and state financial assistance, referred to as the CFA, the summary schedule of prior audit findings, and then the the state auditor general requires us to submit a management letter. So in that management letter, there are certain things that they want us to attest to or respond to and put into that letter that you complied with. This year is a little new in that they have required, and it's the second to the last bullet here, an independent accountant's report having to do with investments. So in the past, we've covered that compliance item in the management letter, but this year they are requiring the auditors to provide a separate independent report and to do additional investment compliance procedures. So no longer do they want us to just bundle that in the management letter. They want to see a separate report, and that's in your CAFR as well. So you complied with that, and basically what it is they're wanting you to determine that you are following the guidelines before statutes and so forth. My guess is that there may be governments and municipalities out there that are not complying, and so it's another thing that they're shifting to the auditors to make sure that that the oversight that you're doing correctly. So we've prepared that report as well, and that's included in the CAFR. And then the last item on here is a separate report that we prepare, not included with the CAFR at all, but this is an agreed upon procedures report related to the NTD, the National Transit Data Information. So we have completed that. We've provided a draft to Debbie. We're in the process of getting that finalized, and then that will be submitted to make sure that you're in compliance with all of that, and then you should be good to go. Turning to page 4, so the scope of services, since you serve as the financial body of this organization, the committee, we are required to disclose certain communications with this group. One, of course, is the scope of services, which is we were engaged to perform the audit for the fiscal year ended September 30, 2014. If there were any changes in accounting policies, we would need to disclose those and discuss those with you, and we did not have any. As far as audit adjustments, whether considered corrected or uncorrected, we do have a slide on that, slide 15. We'll get to that later on in the presentation. No difficulties in dealing with management. We would need to inform you if we had any issues or if we had any disagreements. So if during the course of the audit, if there were some policies or some accounting treatment that management had that we didn't agree with, and we couldn't change, we would need to disclose this with you, and that's not the case. We have received written representation from management. Management provides us with letters stating that they've provided us with everything that we've asked for. They provided us contracts. They're not aware of anything that should be brought to our attention. We've gotten all the minutes that we needed to read, contracts, these type of things. So we've gotten that. We are not aware of any consultation that you've had with other accountants, and this item is really speaking to opinion shopping, where a company or an organization may not like what the auditor's results are, and then they may go out and try to find another auditor real quick and switch over. So we need to be cognizant of that and disclose if we're aware of that, as well as you need to disclose that to us. And then the last item is independence, and of course that's a key element in every audit, and we're here to say that we are independent relative to the Pinellas Coast Transit Authority. So the significant areas and the key processes that we looked at as a part of this particular audit is we look at the revenues, generation and affairs. Grants management is a key area for you, so we look at those policies, procedures. We look at litigation. We did receive updates from legal counsel relative to any outstanding claims or changes in claims, and we are required to get that up through the date that we issue the report, which will be today's date. So today's date will be the date of the audit report, and there's some key things. Even though we're auditing September 30, 14 data and information, there's still a lot of things we have to do between that date and today's date to be able to sign off on the opinion. We look at procurement, that's a big area for you as well, looking at capital assets, human resources, we get into salaries, fringe benefits, census information, claims, all these types of things. Information technology, we do come in and look at your controls, user controls. We've had some discussions on some of those areas in the past. And then financial reporting. Financial reporting is at the end of the process when you pull all the information within your financial statements or financial records and generate reports and financial information that you can use to make critical decisions with the information that you have. So those are kind of the key areas that as a part of the audit. Page 6, this is a condensed statement of net position. And we've got presented the current year, 2014, as well as 2013. And looking at the total assets, your total assets decreased from 139 million to 128. The primary reason for that decrease is twofold. The receivable line item, you see a decrease from 7.3 million to 3.1, and that's about a $4 million decrease. And that's a result of last year, 2013. It included about a $5 million grant receivable that was owed due to you for the Gilling buses. So you had some buses some funds that you had not yet received. I did go back and look at 2012 and 2013 to see what the receivable amount had been, and they're much more in line with what this year's numbers are. The 2012 receivable was 3.9 million, and the 2011 receivable was 3.5. So it just appears as if 2013 was a blip year where it was higher than in the past. And the other reason for the change in your total assets would be your capital assets. That line, capital assets, is net, and that's net of accumulated depreciation. You acquired a lot of buses in the last year, and so as a result, those are being depreciated. So the decrease in the net of about 6.9, it's close to $7 million, is totally attributable to the increase in the depreciation that you had. So you had the accumulated depreciation in 2013 was 62 million. The accumulated depreciation in 2014 is 71 million. That difference is $9 million. You didn't really have a whole lot of additions. Your total property, plant, and equipment prior to depreciation only increased about $2,000. So your net, and so that results in your decrease in assets. So it's a function of buying new assets and depreciating them and how that's affecting the balance sheet. The liabilities in that position, your accounts payable, you see a decrease there. And again, the prior year is showing a payable. You had ordered the buses, so you had a payable in there of $5.5 million a year ago. So again, I went back to look at prior years to see how comparable it was. And for 2012, your accounts payable was 2.8 million versus 3.1 this year. So again, in line with that. And then in the year prior to that, it was down to 1.8. Yes?
Quick question. What depreciation schedule do we use on the equipment? Is it 12 years to 0 or on the buses?
Oh, on the bus, I'm sorry.
On the buses?
On the buses, it's 12 years.
12 years, okay, thank you.
Yeah. There's a footnote in the statements that lists all the lives of the years and so forth, but that's a good point. But when you're adding buses that cost $600,000 a pop, and you divide that by 12, it can be a pretty significant number, correct. The other accrued expenses went up a small amount, and that's primarily due to the number of days that's considered accruing for your salaries and wages, because depending when your cutoff is, when your employees are paid. So for this particular year, fiscal year 14, the accrued wages was 10 days versus last year it just happened to come out to be 9 days. So as a result, your accrued expenses went from 2.75 to 2.9. Your claims and judgments also is reflecting an increase as well. And that has to do with the increase in your workers' comp and your general liability claims. So in the financial statements, in note 6, there's a lot of information about that information and where the claims are, and that's the fallout. So it increased about $1.2 million. Other post-employment benefits increased about $300,000, and that again is disclosed in the financial statements as well in note 8. which is located on page 40. So your total liabilities decreased as well. So your assets decreased, your liabilities decreased about $3 million. And then your net position is a function of your assets less your liabilities equals net position. And of course, your net position consists of a lot of bricks and mortar and vehicles. So if you see you're invested in capital assets, the $79,199,000, you can see that that mirrors the number on the assets of your capital assets net of $79,199,000. So those figures are a function of. Now, if you had any debt on those assets, then we would reduce the amount, the net position by the debt, but you don't have any debt on those. So your net position, which is invested in capital assets, is the same number that's on your balance sheet. Then your unrestricted consists of $36 million. 25 of that is for capital asset replacement and other projects, and 11.1 million of that is 2 months of your operating reserve that you've established. And then your restricted, you have a small portion of restricted net assets, and those represent grant resources that you have that need to be used for specific purposes. So overall, your total liabilities in that position decreased 11 million as well. Turning to the next page 7, this is your condensed statement of revenue and expenses and changes. So we talked about the balance sheet and the assets and liabilities. Now we look at the revenues and expenses to see what happened during the current year. So you can see you have your total operating revenues decreased from $14.8 million to $14 million. So it was about a $688,000 decrease. And a big portion of that is due to increased discounts that you had. So that's about a 4.7% decrease. And looking at your fair revenues, the changes in the demand response and advertising are pretty comparable. And then the next section, which is your expenses, if you drop down to total expenses, your total expenses increased about $4 million. So your revenues are down a little bit, your expenses increased about 5.8%. And looking at the composition of that, or the breakdown, you can see that a big portion of that is in your administration and finance. So you see your administration and finance line item increased from $9.8 million to about $11 million, and that's about a $1 million increase. And that pertains to some additional costs for wages and fringe benefits, but primarily is dealing with the increase in the general liability claims expenses. So when we talked about the accrual on the balance sheet being higher, it's because you had quite a few more claims from your actuarial reports that you get relative to your claims liability. Marketing, pretty much in line. Depreciation, it was asked on what the depreciation is, and so depreciation increased $1.2 million. So historically it had been $8 million, but keep in mind some of the buses were capitalized in 2013 as well, and then this year, 2014, you got a full year of depreciation for those that were placed in service in 2013, and then you've got the ones that were placed in service this year. So you've got an increase in your depreciation. So your operating loss had an increased loss, if you would, from $53.5 million to $58 million. And that's offset by other revenue. So we separate this out between what we consider your operating activities, and then you've got these other things that help supplement or help pay for your expenses. The first line item is your property taxes, and of course that's a key element here for you. You've had increases in property values, so that's nice to report that you had an increase in your revenues of about 3.4%. So you had an increase of about $1 million from $32.3 million to $33 million. Your operating grants are about the same. Your capital grants had a significant decrease, and that's to remind you that the capital grant revenue last year was for those buses that you got. So you're able to get capital grants for those buses as opposed to going out and issuing your own debt to finance those. So you had the hybrid buses and the cutaway buses that you had last year. Interest went down a little bit because of the rates, change in the rates. And then the other item just had to do with the gain of sale of some capital assets and some other items. So overall, the total other revenues, which is added to the change, was about $50 million. So your overall decrease in that position was $8.2 million. The last line item I threw on there was, what was the change in your net position if we back out depreciation and we back out capital grants? Because oftentimes depreciation being a non-cash item and so forth, people kind of look at that different. But if you looked at it by taking out those two items, you were pretty much at $408,000. On the next page, sometimes it's easier to see pictures and look at hard numbers for the non-accountants in the room. So this is just giving you some 5-year history of operations, expenses, transportation, maintenance. You can kind of see what's going on there. And of course, depreciation, you saw the increase because of the buses that were added to that. Page 9, the other revenues that we spoke about, you kind of see what's happening with property taxes. So that's back on the upswing. Operating grants did take a little dip, but you can see where it's been in the last couple of years. Capital grants is all over the place because that's just depending on when you're able to get those grants to help pay for those buses. And then the ARA grants kind of went away. You had some ARA money that you had received years ago, and then the interest in other is pretty small. So the next page, this is just some additional information I wanted to provide with you, and this comes off of the condensed statement of cash flows, which is in your financial statements. And this is just looking at it from a cash standpoint, like I said, forget about the accruals and forget about depreciation and so forth. So what were the receipts from customers? What were the payments that you had to suppliers? And what were the payments that you had to make to your employees for salaries and benefits and so forth? So your net cash used for operations was $47 million this year versus $42 last year. And then how is that offset? So the proceeds from your property taxes, the operating grants that we spoke about, purchasing assets, so forth. So your cash provided from non-operating was about $46 million. So that's what affects your cash and cash equivalents that's sitting in the bank at the end of the year. So at the end of September, your cash and cash equivalents decreased just shy of 1.5 million from the previous year. Turning to page 11, this is information again that's in the statistical information, but wanted to just kind of point this out to see that you're having an uptick now on the side is what we're seeing with a lot of our other municipalities that we audit. Just to remind you that your millage rate is at 0.705, your statutory limit is 0.75. So you've been at that rate since 2012 when you showed the first increase. Prior to that, you were down to 5.601. The next page is fare box revenue ratio. Again, this is in the CAFR in the statistical information. And it's just showing you the fare box revenues compared with operating expenses, backed out depreciation, and what the percentage is. So you've got your operating expenses as a percentage of your revenues is at about 22%, which is pretty much in line with where it's been in the last several years. So moving on to the single audit, as I referred to, those are the funds that you receive, federal and state grant fundings. We have to go through a calculation to determine which grants that we will select to audit. There's certain criteria that we have to look at, whether it's considered a high-risk grant, whether it's been looked at in the last couple years. We generally have to look at all the high-risk grants within 3 years, every 3 years. So we go through and determine which ones that we'll test. This year, we tested from the Department of Transportation, the Federal Transit Cluster, as well as the Transit Service Programs Cluster. And in the state funds as well, we go through a similar calculation to get certain coverage requirements. We looked at the Florida Department of Transportation Public Transit Block Grant. That's a pretty intensive audit as far as those grant documents. We have to pull separate samples of items. We have to test a variety of things. We had no findings, no exceptions in any of those grants that we had performed the audit. Turning to page 14, this was our following up on our internal control, A133, which is the OMB budget that governs the single audit and the management letter comments. So last year we had no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and we did not have any recommendations to report on. This year, as I indicated, we had no findings in compliance with the grants that we tested. So we had no material weaknesses, we had no significant deficiencies. However, we did have to write the non-compliance finding for the Department of Homeland Security that had occurred during the year. So that was written up because it fell over the threshold amount that we have to report to the government agency. As far as our recommendations, we recommend that there continues to be an improvement in your closeout process as far as getting the books closed and getting it put together and so forth. That seems to be a little more time consuming. If you look at the next slide, this is a recap of the audit adjustments, reclass and pass, and I'm going to let Amy address those with you to just kind of go through what the nature of these adjustments were and why there were 15 adjustments during the course of the audit. Amy.
The first thing I want to point out is they weren't audit adjustments. Every entry that we recorded was prepared by the finance management. So it was more of a timely issue. We come out and do our field work beginning of December. So during the months of October and November, they're closing out their books, preparing all the schedules, and then we come out and start our audit, usually the first week of December. When we got out here, we received the trial balance, we imported it, we started our procedures. It was stated up front that fixed assets is one of the main areas that they weren't able to timely reconcile. So while we were out here, we were doing our work on the other areas. But when we received the fixed asset schedules, they were correctly provided to us and everything that was in there was correct. There was just 10 entries that management prepared to get the trial balance that we had already received correct based on the schedules that they were able to reconcile. So 10 of the 15 entries that were prepared by management up here are related to fixed assets specifically. 2 of them were more of items that management can't help. We were rating on actuary reports for both the self-insurance claims and the OPEB. So those were 2 entries that are understandable. They're waiting on the actuary report. They can't put the entries in prior to us coming out in December. So those would most likely be recurring entries that you would see every year. And then the 3 other entries that we had were small items. We're reclassing grant receivables, grant revenues that were booked into the wrong accounts, or grant receivables that were booked into regular receivables, so we had to move them and reclass them to a grant receivable. But like I said, we didn't feel that it weren't a significant deficiencies because management caught these. It was management schedules they provided us. It was more of a timely issue, so it was more of a recommendation to close out fixed assets going forward earlier.
And then on the last slide I have is upcoming GASB statements that are going to be effective for you and how that impact is going to affect you. So GASB 68 will be required to be implemented in fiscal year 15. We've talked about this for the last couple of years. GASB 68 deals with accounting and financial reporting for pension plans. And so you will be required to look at the unfunded liabilities. You're in the FRS plan, so you'll have to see what additional information you'll be able to get from FRS relative. And it's a huge undertaking because they will have to provide enough information for you to disclose all the required disclosures that you're going to have in your pension footnotes. And because there's such a huge pension body, they have been asked to, when they provide the detailed information, to bring it out to 10 decimals, because so many organizations, governments, and so forth, they're going to be 0, you know, when they get these numbers, and they need something to be able to report. So they have, I've been informed that they're going to provide all the information going out 10 decimals, so that organizations, smaller cities and smaller groups that are a part of it will be able to have some data and some information that they can provide. GASB 69, we don't see that affecting you, or 71. 72 has to do with fair value measurement and application. But this other one on the OPEB GASB, the exposure draft was issued in May of 2014. The comment deadline was due in August. So what they're trying to do on OPEB is they're pretty much trying to piggyback 68. So the 68 you've got your own defined benefit plans, you will now be required to book the unfunded long-term obligations, which you haven't had to do in the past, just the current portion. So this is going to affect you because you have an unfunded obligation on the OPEB of about $3 million right now. So we'll see when this standard comes out and when it'll be required to be implemented. I'm sure Debbie will be on top of it and is getting information and be able to coordinate getting the right information from your actuaries to be able to make any adjustments or any disclosures that you have for that. And that was all I had. I'd be glad to answer any questions or address any issues.
Next, that's on the OPEB. So how will that booking affect our financial statements? Will it show $3 million less in undesignated reserves, or what? How will that change?
The impact will go to net position on the government-wide, and you're right, it's just gonna wipe out some of the reserves that you have.
So the liability will increase by $3 million and the reserve will decrease by $3 million.
Correct, and fortunately, that's not a big number. I mean, we're seeing other governments. I was at City of St. Pete yesterday. We audited the City of St. Pete, and we were presenting the audit. And one of the council members pointed out that the City of Chicago, not that you're comparable to them, they had a $600 million adjustment that they had to make to reserves for their unfunded liabilities for their police and fire pension plans. So some of them are pretty significant, and that isn't even the OPEB adjustment yet, because that even hadn't come out yet. So that's how it would be recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you. Two quick questions. You mentioned high-risk grants that you need to audit. So my first question is, how do you identify a high-risk grant? And then the second question, on slide 14, you had recommendations for improving the financial close process. Do you have any specific recommendations on that?
To answer the second question, one may be considering the date that we come out to do the audit. So are we coming out too early? Do you need more time to close out? I would prefer to get the trial balance and there's no more adjustments made to it. I mean, we kind of worked around it, this year trying to audit areas that weren't, but like anything else, you get another audit adjustments, I got to enter it into the trial balance, that affects my lead schedules and so on and so forth. So either that or just maybe including that in the monthly closeout process. I'm sure that when you do the monthly closeout, maybe reconciling the fixed assets, or at least trying to do that on a quarterly basis as opposed to waiting to the end of the year. So we felt like she had a handle on it and maybe just ran out of time, or I don't know, I don't want to speak for the department, but that would be my recommendation, to look at that, or maybe we're coming in too early, I don't know. But
if I may address that, I appreciate your remarks, because we lost our fixed asset account, he retired. So we had a gap of time of which we didn't have the position filled. We've implemented, most of the reconciliations are done monthly, but we're not only having them done monthly, but signed off on by management to make sure that they're accurate, etc. So I think part of it, too, we're closing a lot sooner in this fiscal year for each month, and we're tightening down the schedule. I mean, ultimately, my goal in life would be to have a September 30th close, and by December 31st, the statement be done. That would be my ultimate goal in life. And right now, we're just tightening it up, and it's like February's done. Now, actually, we just don't have it for the board presentation, and we're before the end of March. So I think we'll be able to achieve that goal in short order. But we appreciate your indulgence during the difficult time.
Thanks. Thanks, Doug.
You mentioned other, excuse me?
we had another question I was going to.
Oh, excuse me, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
The high-risk question for the grants. We look at the grants to determine the nature of the grant, the dollar amount of the grant, if you've had any findings in that grant in the previous year. Like if the prior year we tested a grant and we had findings, it would be high risk again the next year.
Okay.
And then we're required to look at certain percentage coverages. So if you have $10 million in grants, we have to look at a certain percentage, so we have to throw in, and they break it down between a high-risk A and a high-risk B. There are dollar thresholds that you look at, but a lot of it is auditor judgment as far as determining, and that's why they make sure that over a 3-year period, any type A grant is audited. So nothing's going to fall through the cracks over a 3-year period.
So it's kind of sort of a rotation,
Correct.
auditor judgment, but also a rotation to make sure everything gets done enough.
Right. That's correct.
Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just a quick question. I'm new to the group, and I'm just trying to get a feel for your background and other organizations like this that you might have audited. And are there such things as you know, kind of industry norms that you could bring to a discussion and say how, you know, how we're doing from an audit perspective, how our organization's doing in comparison to industry norms, or do you have that kind of information?
My background as a government auditor is 35 years of auditing, primarily governments and nonprofits. I have no commercial clients. All my clients are governments like yourself. And then in addition to that, I have a background in fraud and forensic accounting. So I do a lot of fraud, and that's why I like to look at internal controls and weaknesses, because that's part of my background. With those 35 years experience, includes auditing a variety of municipalities and counties and school districts. The large ones being City of St. Pete, as I mentioned, currently audit City of Fort Myers, City of Clearwater. And then smaller ones, actually audited with the City of Valley Bluffs many, many years ago, Indian Rock Speed, which is some of those smaller ones. As far as the transit authorities, you're the only transit authority that I audit. Our firm does audit the transit authority in other states. I have not reached out to look at any of those benchmarks, but I think from the statistical information, you should be able to look to see the history that you've had. This is considered an enterprise fund, and so with the experience with auditing other cities, we audit enterprise funds. It's just this is a transit authority versus another type of enterprise fund. So we look at this and use the information experience that we have with others.
So there's nothing really readily available that talks to some of the numbers and things that we're looking at for the transit industry, so to speak.
Right, and that's why I like to provide some of the percentages that we have, so you can see a history over 5 years, what's happening.
How we're doing against ourselves.
Correct, and I know your question is how does that compare with others? And maybe Brad can speak to that based on your involvement with other transits. Do you share information with other?
We do,
Yeah.
and Commissioner Eggers will enjoy maybe being on this committee because we are a member of the American Bus Benchmarking Group, where we compare not just financial data, but all sorts of performance measures against, I think it's 17 other transit systems, including Orlando Links in Florida. They're in it too.
I just have a question on the slide 14, the current year comments. Are any of those significant in terms of the overall audit? Do they have any negative implications?
The compliance finding that we reported on relative to the DHS, that is included in the report, but that pretty much speaks to the issue of the refund that had to be made for that. So whether or not that didn't impact, we didn't select that grant hadn't been selected. We did look at the accounting treatment. Debbie did reach out to us during the year to make sure that the reporting of that refund, because it occurred over a 2-year period, some of those funds, that the accounting of that was correct. So that would probably be the only financial impact, is how you reported that within the books, in the records in this current fiscal year.
Okay, and then my other question has to do with the overall reduction in cash and cash equivalents,
Right.
and just a general decrease in net position. whether, again, that's in any way negative, or is that a one-time?
No, it's a snapshot. You know, we pick a day and time, and your day was 9:30, and so what's happened as of 9:30, and we spoke about how you had accounts payable had increased, your receivable was increased. Well, if that receivable money had come in, you know, September 29th versus coming in October 2nd, you know, you would have had the cash in the bank versus, you know, if you paid the bill September 28th versus, you know, booking it and paying it there. So it's a function of, I think the key here is just to see if there's any big alarming adjustments, and if there's something on there that you didn't anticipate or that you weren't familiar with. So I think by showing that you had a decrease in cash and cash equivalents, I don't think that's an issue at all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So the Finance Committee's job is to recommend approval or recommend receipt of the 2014 audit, is that? To the PSTA board?
I assume that you would approve that at this level, and then we present it at the meeting next week.
So I recommend that we present this to the committee next week.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, well, thank you very much, Ms. Brock. We really appreciate the thoroughness, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next week.
Yes, very good, thank you.
Mr. Chair, we have one more action item on the agenda. We had planned, we do plan to have, continue the meeting and cover the informational items that are on the Finance Committee agenda along with the Planning Committee. We had planned to have that start at 9:45. We were running a little bit behind. What I would suggest is we cover this one other action item to recommend to the board next week. And then the reports, the rest of the items are reports that are in your packet, and we can answer any questions as you might have them, but we wouldn't go through each of those reports. So the last action item is an approval of the bus shelter contract, and Henry Lucas, our meeting director, will walk you through that.
Good morning. As Brad mentioned, we're asking approval to recommend approval for a 3-year contract with 2 1-year renewals with Brasco International for the purchase of replacement bus shelters along with several other amenities. We put out a RFP in January of 2015. We received 3 responsive proposals. Since it was an RFP, we had an evaluation committee that ranked the proposals on quality, experience, and of course cost. At the end of the evaluation, Brasco International was selected of having the shelter that best fit our needs and also was the lowest cost proposal. So at this point, we're asking the committee to recommend approval again for a 3-year contract with 2 1-year renewals with Brasco International for an amount of not to exceed $1,448,650. Now that's a not to exceed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we will spend need to spend all of that. And this is a federally funded grant through the FTA, and it is within PSTA's adopted capital improvement program. I'd be happy to answer any.
The question I had was, this is not the maintenance contract, this is for new shelters.
This is new shelters.
And do we have we finalized a new shelter so we were in design or selection process? Because we were delaying replacing some of them because
Of design?
we hadn't finalized the design.
We have finalized the design. Now, I do have a couple of renderings.
I'm just wondering if we had resolved.
Yes, we did. We finalized the design that fit our needs and complements our stop sign.
So this plan is just for building shelters in selected locations, and how do we Do we know how many actual shelters we plan to build under this arrangement?
This will allow us to purchase approximately 20 new shelters per year over the next 5 years. And that only does about 3% of our existing shelters per year. We also receive requests for shelters where there is no shelter presently. So it's going to be a balanced mix based off need and, of course, stock frequency and how much a stock is used by.
Any other questions?
These are new and replacement shelters?
Right.
And is this a new contract, or do we have an existing contract
This would be
for
a
this?
new
Mr. Chair, yeah, we, as it says in there, we have not bought new shelters since 2009. We've been living off an inventory and replacing as needed or when a pickup truck hits it or something. And so this is a new design for the new standard PSTA shelter. We don't have to buy any, but we have a contract with Brasco. It's a fixed price for the next 5 years. And hopefully we'll be able to replace some. Of course, we're looking at a whole CIP program and looking where we may not be able to buy 20 a year, but at least we have the contract. We of course talk to cities all the time. Cities and groups want different looking shelters than our standard shelter, and we try to work with them as well. So not just this look, but this would become like the standard PSTA shelter unless otherwise modified.
So this will allow us to put those shelters back on 19 that were removed.
Yeah.
We're waiting for the construction.
Any other questions? All right, can you look for a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve a 3-year contract with 2 one-year renewals with Brasco International for an amount not to exceed $1,148,650.
Second?
All in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ann.
Thanks, Ed.
All right.
Okay.
Do we need to take a break today?
Yeah, if you have any questions on any of the reports, feel free to ask them, but otherwise, maybe we can take a 5-minute break. Maybe Trevor, please join me. Okay.
Reassemble? With our associates.
Yeah, right.
Good, how you doing? Planning committee as well.
Okay, good morning.
Morning.
Welcome, Planning Committee. First, we had a little update before, but just for your information, we are, for the first time, hopefully, does it work? Okay, we are live streaming on our PSTA website. So there's one camera back there on the wall, and then there's a camera right here. So if you are, it's a split screen. Basically, it shows the presentation, and then it shows like you all in the back of my head, all at once. But that's available now on our website live, and then once the meeting is over, it's converted to a YouTube, so it stays on there. That's pretty neat. Yeah. And then of course the meeting downstairs, same thing. So I thought we'd bring the planning committee in to join the finance committee for these 3 informational presentations so you can both see them. Again, they are for information only. This is not an action item that we're asking today. I'm going to start off by talking about the overall work plan. We started talking about this at the February workshop, and then in talking with all of you, or I believe now I've talked to all 15 PSTA members since then. I want to share my thoughts on a path forward, and then Debbie, our Chief Financial Officer, is going to come up and sort of go through the key assumptions that we have put together in forecast planning for our budget process, which is about to get going. And then Chris Cochran, our planner, is going to talk about this new tool that I think is really good. It's our route performance monitoring tool that uses a data approach to looking at all of our routes. So when we make these adjustments, it is based on the data, and he's going to kind of walk through some of those results. And so I think that we can get those done between now and noon. So just kind of take it with that. We'll probably present a condensed version of these presentations based on your feedback today, next week. So, of course, as you all saw at the workshop last week, and then I'm sure you've been talking to folks. I know we've all received some emails. There's a lot of discussion about what should we do next. Some folks believe we should immediately start reducing our services. Over in Polk County in Lakeland, they have already made one round of cuts, and they've already planned on cutting another 20-some%, I read, this summer. They don't have any other choice, according to Tom Phillips, their executive. They have trouble making their payroll, and they need to make the cuts. They had a referendum in November that was unsuccessful, and they didn't have any built-up reserves or anything, so they're having to make those cuts now. PSTA is in a little different situation, but that's one idea. Let's immediately move forward in making service reductions. Another option, other people have said to me, other board members have said to me, no, we might not be able to do anything. Let's just move forward with the standard FY16 budget process and go through that process without making any decisions. Some folks have suggested, no, we need to start looking for new services and moving beyond green light to something new quickly. What I'm suggesting, what I'm recommending to you based on the feedback I've received from you and others, is that we hold off on making service adjustments or reductions or make our major decisions on our budget until we can come to consensus on a higher level policy, a path forward for the agency. Obviously we've been working on green light for many years, and that was our plan, and we need to transition now to a new PSTA and a new policy. And so what I'm going to recommend here, I'm going to show you my thoughts on what that policy might contain, but these are just sort of my opening recommendations, and I think we're going to want to have some discussion on each of them in more detail. I don't necessarily believe it's not my goal for you today to have a lot of input, or you can say whatever you like, but to come up with this idea, the point is to have this as our first discussion. And I have a plan for how that can be laid out. It took us a long time, it took this community a long time, even before I got here, to develop the Green Light Pinellas plan. I'm not suggesting that we go and launch another 30-year planning exercise right away. I'm suggesting maybe we do a shorter term, like the next 2 or 3 years. This is what PSTA is doing. You know, I know all of you, including myself, when people outside of PSTA or family members or whatever said, what's going on at PSTA? For the last 2 or 3 years, it was, we're working on Green Light Pinellas. That was our plan. Now, I think Mayor Pachelski said this to me too, what's PSTA working on? I don't know. We don't know. That's a problem. That is a vacuum of leadership that we need to fill. And so what I'm suggesting is that's what we have to work on first, is develop a plan. Even though it's a shorter term plan, it's very important that we reach consensus on that. There's a couple of elements I think that are important to that, but again, these are all for your feedback, and we don't have to include these, and we can adjust these. Number one is this idea that came at the workshop and others, that it's time now for us to focus on our core services, meaning providing a customer-oriented bus service to the best of our ability. I think this also means that the board would ultimately make a statement that we're open to all ideas, but we're not planning on a 2016 ballot initiative. that we make some kind of statement in that regard. Number two is very important. The board would reach consensus that we are not going to sit at the status quo. We have done a lot of planning over the last few years. There was a fully vetted community input, community bus plan that was part of Green Lake, and that has principles that we plan to implement, that we do plan to change the bus service in Pinellas to make it better, to make it more customer-oriented, more streamlined, look to where we have low performing or low ridership routes, empty buses, as some have said, and reduce those. Make it more efficient, that we are going to change. We're not going to try to sit at status quo. Number three, and you might recall that I think it was actually the PSTA board member Ben Diamond who suggested this at the workshop. We make a statement also that we do not believe, as the PSTA board, we don't believe that a 30% cut doing nothing is in the best interest of Pinellas County, for the economy and for our community. And because we don't believe that is the case, we are open to looking at all options of expense reduction and changes and additional revenue options. Number 4 and 5 tie together, and I know I got to condense this and make it more manageable, clearly. Number 4 and 5 are tied. They are our capital program. We will recognize that the 30-year, three-legged stool where the federal government bought the buses for PSTA and the local funds were used to operate them has changed because the federal funds have been reduced. And that we recognize that and we develop a new sustainable bus replacement program that I'm recommending includes locally funded buses for the first time. All of our buses today are all been bought by the federal government, but we changed that. I'm recommending, number 5, that we take the built-up reserves, the reserves which, at least I thought, maybe until the auditor just said otherwise, were north of $15 million of undesignated reserves that I talked to the board at the last meeting about. Those are one-time source of funds that we use those to buy buses over the next several years. Our capital program is actually funded for the needed buses for next year. So these funds would be used over the next 2 or 3 years to buy buses. The other thing that does is buy time for the Florida DOT and the Pinellas MPO to develop a multimodal priority list for those STP funds and other funds that they might have. Because as we heard last meeting and at the MPO from the Florida DOT, it's very hard. There are effects if money needs, or a new project gets added in the early years, but in the outer years, they have much more flexibility, and they can adjust funds or beyond the 5-year work program of FDOT. They don't have a plan. There's essentially no impacts to other projects. So by using the reserves up front and then still seeking other sources like the SDP funds in the future, we can develop a sustainable bus replacement program. I know I'm all the way to 6, but I still think this is very important. It's not our primary focus, our core mission, which is number 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it's still important. It is important to continue to pursue in parallel making incremental improvements to the transit system. We need to be mindful of the ongoing operating costs and the capital expenditures and how this plays with the rest of our services. But we need to keep pursuing pilot projects like our legislative priority, the bus rapid transit project along the Central Avenue corridor, Clearwater Beach to the Airport Express, the fare collection project, etc. Commissioner Long and I went to Tallahassee last week to speak to the Transportation Appropriations Committee of the Senate, which is chaired by Senator Latvala. And I know we had a discussion at our last board meeting about whether or not the timing of whether or not we should be seeking pilot project funding was appropriate or not. I thought maybe Commissioner Long could just maybe give her perspective on the takeaways from that trip to Tallahassee and why it's important. Obviously, there's timing of when they're in session, but how it's important now with the legislators that we have in place that we pursue these funds while we're making these other changes. If you have any comments.
Thank you, Brad, and I will attempt to summarize it very quickly in order to be brief, because I know we have a lot to cover this morning. Clearly, with the failure of Greenlight, we know that our Pinellas County as a whole is not yet ready for the vision that we all tried to bring forward. And so what that says to a lot of us and to some of the key stakeholders in Tallahassee is that we really are about now changing the culture in Pinellas County so that people can see the value for themselves in a robust public transportation system. In an effort to bring about that change in culture, a very dedicated and very focused priority on 1 or 2 pilot projects over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years will ensure that we are focusing on those areas with the highest ridership for right now that we can enhance and that we can make the very best it can possibly be in terms of how much people will want it and use it and how helpful it'll be to our communities and our business partners and the citizens that live here. And so in our request before the Senate committee for $1.25 million to enhance the central BRT line, it was overwhelmingly accepted as something that was very, very positive. And I think it's important for us as a board and for us as community leaders to recognize that in moving forward with that plan, right now, immediately, we are using the opportunity because our current Senator Jeff Brandes is the chair of Transit Appropriations, and that's his district. Secondly, the other focus enables us to utilize the position that our other senator, Jack Latvala, is in with regard to trying to focus on a plan to take people from mainland Clearwater out to Clearwater Beach. Now we have 2 very focused projects that are on the radar for our legislators, and so that they know how we're thinking. We did have the opportunity, there are 7 out of the 9 members on the Senate committee that I personally served with. One of them was actually a roommate of mine while I served in the legislature. And so I did have an opportunity to have a delightful conversation with the 7 of them. They were very, very positive. And so I'm very hopeful that we will be successful. And now it would be good for those of us sitting on PSTA, if we can, to write letters of support to the committee requesting that they approve this appropriation request and help us have a jump start to begin to change the culture in our county. Does that sum it up?
I think that was
Thank you,
great.
Commissioner, for your
Perfect.
hard work.
Yeah.
Yes, and we've directed our lobbyist in Tallahassee to do immediate follow-up with all of the committee members and to keep his fingers on the pulse of that legislation as it's working through the process. And we also have connected with House members to do their part on the House side. So hopefully by the end of session, we'll have a happy little ending. And it's very time sensitive. You know, to not move forward in that direction right now would have put us back even further. And so I'm very hopeful, and we have another trip planned for the 25th and 26th. I know there are many members from PSTA that are going and from the St. Pete Chamber, and so it should be good. Stay tuned.
Quick question, Mr. Chairman. The ask for the VRT was 1.25?
Yes.
And y'all did a great job, saw it on the Florida Channel, outstanding. Did we make an ask for the Clearwater to Clearwater Beach connection? Is there a dollar value attached to that?
No, because that's an initiative that is going to be forthcoming from Senator Latvala.
Okay.
And Brad's attempt to discuss it with the members of the committee was just to get it on their radar.
Okay, so our support
We
letters-
did have a planted question, though. I was pretty proud of that.
I think I saw that.
Yeah.
So our ask or support letter should be for the 1.25, and what's the name of the committee?
Transportation Subcommittee,
Okay, thank you.
Appropriations.
Appropriations, yeah.
Say it again now.
It's transportation,
Appropriations Subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
transportation and economic development.
It's TED, Tourism, Economic
Economic
Development,
Yeah.
Transportation.
Quickly moving on. Number 7, again, is a third priority. It's certainly not something that's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years of this policy, but we make a statement, we consider making a statement that the plan that we put forth under Greenlight Pinellas, the idea of a high-frequency grid system across the entire county is the preferred transit plan, the vision for the transit service in Pinellas County to provide the citizens of Pinellas County with a true option that they don't have today. That we state that. The Pinellas MPO, as those of you who were on the MPO last fall, approved their long-range transportation plan and it included the Greenlight Bus Plan as the vision plan for the Pinellas MPO, and that we would share that. It's sort of like a candle for Greenlight, maybe in memoriam, but we don't throw it away and necessarily come up with a whole new plan or spend a. We do need to look at it all. Everything has changed. It's not the exact plan. There's certainly no need to do the exact plan that was under Greenlight, but we do believe that a high-frequency grid system, beyond, we work on these pilot projects, and incrementally we move in that direction. Finally, and this is not really a priority, but this is a process, that we launch a process to review the PSTA governance structure and ensure that, especially now, that we strengthen the roles of the committees, the planning and the finance committees, the chair and the role that the chair plays, the CEO, me, and hold me accountable for implementing these policies, and how that all works together. It has to be very, very strong. It has to be very strong, especially now post-Greenlight, in developing this plan and moving it forward, and that we proactively look at ways we can strengthen that. I'm suggesting that we take some time to go through these items, look at maybe other items that board members might have ideas about, go into the details of each of them in some degree. But again, I'm suggesting a process where we start with the PSTA Executive Committee. This is a high-level policy, and the idea, at least my recommendation, would be this policy be approved somewhat in advance of the budget process. The budget process we're required, we follow the same schedule that the county and all the cities follow, so we have to get moving on that. So the planning committee will still be responsible for developing the budget. But that this executive committee work, that will be expanded then, I'm suggesting to maybe some half-day workshops by the full PSTA board over the next couple of months I think it's urgent that we kind of move on this, and my goal is that this would drive then the budget, the budget decisions. There will be certainly enough discussion, I know, at the planning committee on the budget, because it's always the devil's in the details, right? But and the route service design and whatnot. But the policy would be set by the full PSTA board ultimately, and there would be consensus reached for, in the next couple of months on this direction. So that's really the takeaway that I was hoping to hear your comments on, and hope to get your concurrence on this morning, is that we look to this, to develop this policy, this high-level path forward. I know some of you have suggested it does need a name, better name than that, so maybe we'll come up with a name for it. I'm not sure. Before we move on any of these other items, we do have the budget process. It's consistent with state law, which covers PSTA, all the cities, counties, where we have to have a budget hearings. We basically have to recommend a budget to the PSTA board at your June meeting. So I'm suggesting moving on this policy process over the next maybe 2 months, so that it would be perhaps adopted maybe at your May meeting. We would start with the planning committee still working on some elements of the budget, like we have in years past. You're going to hear some of it in a moment. But then we'd have that policy in place before the budget needed to be approved. As far as redesigning the services, changing the services, that also has a timeline that is going to, some of the development work is starting now. Again, as I said, we want to make sure, we don't want to just take the community bus plan that was developed several years ago and not look at it, but to apply a data-driven approach to looking at those changes, which you're going to hear about how we've got a process for that. Looking at the entire network across the whole county, certainly, but in areas where we are recommending, or the plan recommends, changing routes dramatically, like northern Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, Pinellas Park, we've come up with this idea of targeted areas that we would do more detailed planning, maybe a whole plan for downtown St. Petersburg. We're actually working with the city of St. Pete staff on that. And we do the same thing for northern Pinellas, looking at how maybe we will be reducing the connector services, but maybe enhancing the Jolly Trolley and putting more resources on the US 19 route. Those kind of things, and how that affects doing a more targeted research in certain areas. Of course, there's a give and take with the capital planning assumptions, because we need buses to run the service, or if we reduce the number of services that reduce the number of buses, then we don't have to fund those in the capital plan. And then, last but not least, it's my goal, it's always my goal, it's called public transportation for a reason. The public has to buy into this. I presented this to the TRAC committee, the Riders Committee that PSTA has, which is a really good committee. We just added a whole bunch of new citizens to that are riders. They ride. To be on the committee, you have to ride at least 2 or 3 times a week. So they were very positive with this approach. But to reach out to the community in 2 different ways. One, we're going to have, and those of you who've been on PSTA through the recession for a while know that when you propose any kind of change to the routes, you get a room full of people that are affected by those. We're obviously going to try to adjust services in the way that affects the minimal amount of people, the least number of people, but they will come to the meeting. And that's important to hear from them and talk to them and find solutions to their transportation needs. But our goal is to try to actually improve the service. And this idea about taking resources from areas where the ridership is not, and moving those resources to the core routes to make those services even better. You don't necessarily get people coming to the PSTA board and saying, that's a great idea, do that. you know. And so we would try to be proactive and reach out and try to present this policy and this plan, what we're going about here, out in the community, to maybe not have them come to the meeting, but at least get the idea about what we're driving toward in the public arena to be understood. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be glad to hear any comments or thoughts you might have.
And I'm sure that it's in there. It's just that I don't see TD jumping out there anywhere. I'm sorry. So,
I didn't hear you. What did you say?
transportation disadvantaged.
Oh,
Yeah, well, obviously that's a huge, it's a growing, it was started out big and it's gotten even bigger, part of PSTA services. And it's a very important program. You know, Ross Silvers is here, serves you on the local coordinating board.
I know Ross.
And the LCD and Ross have already set up a committee of the
I'm on
LCD
that.
to start looking at that.
We have a meeting, Brian, when? Next week?
Thursday.
Next week.
Again, what I'm recommending here is to give us time to work on this policy, this high-level policy, and first, and not make any rash decisions on TD or the fares or the service adjustments until we have a policy position in place. And that will give more time. You know, obviously, if we made changes to the fares or the service tomorrow, it would perhaps save more money. It would save money, and that would be a good thing. But it's better to do this right. It's better to take time. You know, we've made some assumptions in some of the things you're going to see about an October 1 change, but none of that is set in stone. I would rather hold off on making changes until we feel comfortable. Now, I'm telling Ross, I'm counting on him coming up with reaching consensus on your LCD on TDI. I know that, and he's going to be working on that, but I know there's going to be things that come up over the next couple of months, and we'll be able to respond to that.
Am I still in charge?
Who's sharing?
You're in charge. You're in
You're in
charge.
charge. I acquiesce. Just a couple of comments. Thank you, Brad, for doing what I perceive as something to try to bring us all together. I feel like it's really important to create confidence and credibility. And I think by going through a process like this will help us get there. I do agree that we need to be able to tell people in one sentence or two what we're doing, whatever that is. It needs to be very clear, concise, and direct.
Yeah.
While I heard you mention it, I didn't see it in our priorities, and I think, I think it's a given, but I'll just put it out there that we include economic development in our economy and our decision-making process. And during Greenlight, we had one voice and one goal, and I certainly think we need that again, to where we're all on the same page. And I think what I'm seeing is your attempt to try to get us there.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we can all maybe take a breath and step back and allow these next few months to evolve and try to get to that point where we're confident of what we're doing and everybody's in agreement. And I would also suggest that you may have included it, but it wasn't directly stated. I think not only do we need to be in consensus and getting out into the public, but I really like the idea of some version of our old APTC meeting or group together, where we've got our MPO and our PSTA and other folks in the community together, so that everybody's getting buy-in, that we work more strongly with MPO. They have a new director who has a lot of experience that I think can help us. And again, using some of that similar process that we did before that
at least internally for us, was successful, even if it wasn't externally.
Yeah.
Will bring us all together, and I look forward to the next couple of months to try to figure out what we're doing and coming together in one voice.
I've spoken to the new MPO director. Phone, and he and I are going to get together when he gets back.
Good.
He's coming back to Pinellas a couple times before he starts from Orlando. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Commissioner Welch?
Yeah, thank you. I love the new ACPT type organization they have everybody at the table. That's a great idea. And I really like the approach Brad has laid out here. I had one question back on the first, I think it's the first slide. Yeah, under 4, the capital plan is, and I'm just kind of thinking back to our beach renourishment for the county. I know it's not connected directly, but one of the things we had talked about is if we step forward and did, say, for example, a 6 cent for tourist tax and applied that to beach renourishment, it might impact the future dollars we get from the feds. They might say, well, you have it covered locally, so we don't need to support you as much in beach renourishment. Is that a risk if we, for the first time, locally fund bus replacement? You said that's the first time we've ever done that. Does that affect our ability to draw federal funds later on? Will they look at us and say, well, you've handled this locally, so you really don't need federal dollars? Or
That's a good question. What I would say is, number one, not directly. I don't see that, because it doesn't look like earmarks are coming back. The vast majority of federal funds that we get are via formula. The reason I paused a little bit, though, is because of your comment. I was just in Washington a couple weeks ago. Commissioner Rice was there too, and we were talking because the transportation bill is up and is actually going to expire on May 31st, and it looks like Congress is probably going to do what they like to do and punt and move it down, kick the can down the road. But there's a lot of discussion about this, and there was a meeting amongst all of the bus systems to talk about how the last authorization reduced bus funding, increased rail funding, and how they might work to combat that. And it went around the room, and all these transit systems from around the country, Oakland, St. Louis, whatever, they're running 30-year-old buses, 17-year-old buses, 18-year-old buses. And I felt like, I cannot be whining. I mean, PSTA has been doing so well. We have been replacing our buses every 12 years like you're supposed to for a very long time. And relative to the rest of the United States, your comment about the Fed saying you're okay on beach renourishment, I think that is sort of our case in this national policy discussion compared to others.
Well, as long as we can just keep that out there as maybe a consequence of us doing that, just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, my ears went up when you mentioned the reserves, and what did the auditor say about the reserves?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw Brad's Facebook page over there. We were talking about, there's a new pronouncement coming out for post-employment benefits. And we'll be recording like full liabilities in the coming years. And our OPEB, what's called OPEB right now, is about $3 million. And you have to understand when they do the actuarial studies on that, the $3 million is out 20, 30 years.
Right.
And what most transit agencies do is what we're doing right now on a pay-as-you-go basis. I think there's some prudent financial, taking steps to set aside now, so because that $3 million grows every year. Now
The
maybe
county's got the same issue, so it's like $3 million.
it's $3 million,
reserves.
which is very, compared to other transit agencies, very minuscule. But it can grow, and I think any steps we can take now to let that money grow over a series of the next 30 years would be prudent.
So the unrestricted reserves instead of 17 is now 14, is that?
Right now, it's at about 15.3 million is what we anticipate for the end of the year. And, if we start setting aside a little bit, if there's extra money, every year, just keep putting it in the cookie jar, as I call it. We won't have any issues.
So you're saying you wouldn't have to put all 3 million in 1 year?
No, you wouldn't have to. You could.
Yeah.
That's certainly something you could do, and let the interest grow on that to cover any increases in the OPEB as we go forward.
Okay.
But you can do it over a multi-year period,
Okay.
Thank you.
so don't panic.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Okay. Debbie?
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Oh.
Well, it just popped in my head. So are we in agreement then that this would be recommended to the full board? Is that what we're doing here? Is this the purpose of this discussion? I'm just trying to understand. I know it's informational, but as the committee structure, are you looking for a recommendation, or is that too early in this process?
We have an executive committee scheduled now for Monday, ahead of the board meeting, and perhaps we could have a discussion at the executive committee, and then maybe at the board meeting on next Wednesday, the executive committee can make that sort of recommendation. Having both the committees both have heard it as well.
Yes, well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I couldn't help myself because I think clarity right now is really, really important for our board. This, I don't know about the rest of my colleagues here, but the PSTA board is a pretty large board for a board of policymakers. I think you can all agree. And because of that, it occurs to me, and I was so happy to hear Brad mention it, that I think the board as a whole, this is just my personal opinion, could be much more effective in setting, as Brad referred to it, high-level policy if we had a larger, for example, I'm just using this as an example, executive committee that helped to create continuity within the executive committee. For example, if we could agree to invite the past chair to, and whoever that ends up being as time goes forward, to also stay on the executive committee as like an ex officio member, and then ensure that we always have, I don't know, maybe the newest member of the board or somebody that serves in an at-large capacity on the executive committee as well. I think it would give us a lot of continuity as the chair changes each year, and you will give yourself an opportunity to have new members be brought up to speed with the responsibility of being on PSTA. It is complicated. There's a lot to learn when you first come on the board, and not everyone even sits on a committee. And some of the newer members, and I'm happy to see Commissioner Eggers here, for a while, a lot of what we talk about is like, oh my God,
Foreign language.
What are they talking about? I don't understand. So, I guess what I'm looking for is some thoughts from my colleagues sitting here about how you feel about that, because it would be a major change in terms of, I've only been to one executive committee meeting, but it was a quite interesting experience from my perspective.
I'd be fine with that.
Does it make sense to you though?
Totally. With some variation of that, I mean, without getting into the weeds, yeah, I'd be fine.
It's all about leadership development and better communication.
Thank you, it is, yeah. Okay, good.
Brad, you almost, or I think Julie was almost saying, should we make a recommendation from this committee to the executive committee and the board? I would just phrase that a little differently, is that it would be helpful to know if you have some concerns with this process that need to be worked on prior to making that presentation to the board. And I haven't heard any yet, but I just wanted to put that out as an opportunity.
The only two things I mentioned was economic development, economy, something being in there somewhere, and the idea of of an ACPT or ACPT alike being in the process somewhere, as to where I don't know, but I think it's not a concern, it's just an addition or something to be considered.
Yeah.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I just, I start hearing this comments from Mayor Bujalski about putting together recommendations and how, and hear from Commissioner Long about how critically important it is to do something soon in Tallahassee. And so I feel like, this is moving rather quickly all of a sudden again. And when I think about last year and the process that we've been through, I keep thinking of, yeah, we've got to keep moving forward on our planning. We got to keep moving forward on our thought process and making those. But at the same time, it's that pause, read, and react kind of thing. I think we just need to take it easy, and we're doing that a little bit here. And just try not to rush things too much. Now, maybe it's because I'm new, and all this is just, I'm trying to catch up to it a little bit. We talked about some of the funding that you said is pretty critical to move on quickly, and I want to make sure that all of those pilot projects that we're talking about fit into all the plans that we have out there, and whether it's the comp plan, whether it's the MPO plan. I do want to make sure that we're all talking the same. Again, you talk about rowing the boat in the same direction. So when you were up in Tallahassee, was there any discussion on regional, between Hillsborough and Pinellas County? Just a question mark, not that needs to be a part of what we're doing now. The governance structure that you talked about, the accountability issues on you as well as the boards that were this. Where, again, for somebody new, have we had, the review of the management team, and are we comfortable? Everybody good? And if we're going to be making statements publicly and we're going to be moving forward in unison and strong, I think we need to make sure that we're all, and maybe it's just getting me up to speed on all of this because I'm not sure where all that lies since the November failure of the green light. And then I think it's really important that we are engaging the public all the time. Because I think we're putting a plan together to go tell people what we're doing. And I think one of the things, at least I heard loud and clear up, mid-North County was, we don't know what's going on. They didn't even know what green light was when I was knocking on doors. So I'm just saying, as much as we feel like we're engaging and have engaged the public, and it's not easy to do, just make sure that's part of whatever we're doing. Along the way, and all the parallel work that we're going to be doing, it sounds like we're going to be doing a lot of parallel work that we're doing now too. And whatever that means, we got to be engaging people in conversation and discussion and interest, trying to generate interest along the way as we're trying to generate interest in Tallahassee and as we're trying to generate interest among the leaders in the county. So just some thoughts.
Mr. Chair, if I could just respond to a couple of things. First, I think you mentioned it. This is an attempt to be sort of a pause, and not rush these decisions. I mean, we definitely, I heard the discussions at the workshop and at the last meeting. To set this high policy level I'm hoping, I believe will give us that time and feel like we have a solid foundation to be making these decisions. That being said, the state legislative session ends in 30 days or 45 days, and as long as we have a plan in place, should money flow down and be approved, and we have a process in place, we should take advantage of that. That's all we're saying about the Tallahassee. I mean, Commissioner Long can maybe chime in on that.
And as long as it dovetails with things that we had in our plan.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're not just taking money, just saying, it's all, and I'm not saying, I'm not suggesting.
But if I could speak to that, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Remember that this was a focus from our workshop we had just a few weeks ago. And so that is one of the things we came out of from the workshop. And we don't control the schedule of the Florida legislature. And so if we want to be able to have a direction and a goal and some very good measurements about how we're moving forward, then I think being able to submit that request now in the beginning of session was a critical thing for us. And so I'm very pleased to see that we have a formalized recommendation to us that obviously Brad and his staff have been working on for, what, 6 months now? It's almost 6 months since green light. So we are a transit agency, and we do have to move forward, and we have to assure people that we know how to do that. And I know it's a tough position for you because there is a lot of catch-up, that's for sure. I know that feeling well.
And your comments about accountability are not correct. We do have processes in place. The board goes through a performance evaluation and whatnot, sets goals, but that can be stronger. And how it interplays with the committees and this new idea for I would say a more high-level executive committee is what I'm suggesting we work on.
Well, I think those pilot projects that we were talking about, I don't think they fall outside the kind of the things that we've been talking about. I just want to make sure that we're chasing the right things with the money that might become available, and that we just do an iteration on that process that says, yeah, this, maybe it wasn't our primary focus before, but it is something that I think that as this new day comes that we're talking about, that it really becomes a primary focus, and therefore it really makes a lot of sense. It's not just money coming and now we're focusing on that, but that it really is a kind of a reaffirmation that that's where we want to go. That, you know, Central Avenue has been talked about for years, but we haven't heard much about it recently, at least at, you know, at the MPO level. That maybe that's something that we just have to relook and reaffirm and just say, yeah, and at the same time chase it, chase the monies that might be available, and again reaffirm that that's the things that we want to be doing,
right,
and not just because the money might be available for a project or a center.
Are we all set? Okay.
I actually agree with everything that's been said, and I'm saying this for the record, I love your fiscally conservative approach. But I think the pace is just about right. No, I think the pace is just about right. We're not rushing to revamp everything for FY16, but we know we've got a fiscal issue out there. But I think what you're saying about communication and all those things are very applicable. I had two things I wanted to, in terms of concerns, I like, as I said, the plan that's been laid out. I just want to reiterate, when we talked about on slide 1, reducing the number of very low ridership routes, and you've got it later on that in the presentation, that we've got to give folks alternatives if we eliminate their only route to work or school, given the demographics of who rides our buses. They don't have driver's license, they don't own cars, so I just think that's very important. The other thing on the executive committee expansion, that would be next year, so that past Chair Johnson will be the first. My commissioner's not listening to me. I feel like I'm at a commission meeting.
That was so unkind.
Are you suggesting that this go into effect next year, so Bill Johnson will be the immediate past chair joining? Okay, so this would take effect.
It's not going to affect you, is that what you're saying?
I'm just clarifying.
No, I mean effective right now.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
No, you're not getting off the hook.
All right. And the other thing, I just wanted to make sure we, really specify what the role of the new expanded executive committee is, especially compared to the planning committee. I mean, is it strategy, is it policy? What's the job of that new executive committee as it compares to the planning committee? But I think it's a good idea for continuity and other
Thank you very much.
So.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay, and we have 2 more topics to cover, so.
I'll have my discussion with the executive.
Okay.
Okay.
Great, thank you guys. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Well, good morning.
Morning.
We've already had one great discussion. We're on to another exciting topic, budgets. So fiscally responsible is an excellent word of the day. Brad talked briefly about, we've got a plan going forward that we go through every year. We like to have a budget in place. It's a draft budget by June, so it gives the board ample time over the summer to take a look at it, digest it, come up with suggestions, especially this year as we're going through things. We will be your team in finance to go through the what-if scenarios. What if we try this? What if we do that? Next month, we'll be coming to the board. We'll be talking about personnel expenses. Personnel, which includes salary plus fringes, is about $40 million and represents about 60% of our expenses. So it's an important piece that we need to talk about. And then we'll be talking about the capital plan. Again, it's very important as we take a look at what's the priorities for PSTA. Then we put together a very thoughtful CIP plan that meets our needs. The overall strategy in putting together the budget is to make sure we have a balanced budget going forward, and it has to dovetail with your strategic plans for the multi-years. And in putting this together, we take a look at the forecasts that we have for this fiscal year, and we're doing something a little different this year. At your place, we have key assumptions report. And this report takes a look at history, it takes a look at our current assumptions, and also future considerations. So as we put that together, we are able to then take a look at the multi-year budget. A multi-year budget, which we've put together a 5-year draft right now, gives you the opportunity to see how the decisions you make today will affect the future. It gives you an idea of the financial stability of PSTA and how those decisions will affect that. In your packet that I just mentioned, the key assumptions report, we have all sorts of assumptions, but I just want to take today, because we'll be spending time over the next couple months discussing a lot of them, a couple of them that are a little different. And one is the fringe rate is well above what your CPI is. And the reason for that is we take a look at the fringe rate, we're at 7% going forward. The biggest part of your fringe benefit costs is health insurance. And health insurance, out of the $11.2 million worth of fringe benefit costs for PSTA, represents about $5.9 million. In fiscal year 15, the year we're in right now, is the first year employees are contributing to their health care costs. We took a look at what was in fiscal year 12, and we split the costs between 50-50 of the increase. For 13 and 14, there were no health care cost increase, and for 15, there was. So this is the first time we have a vested interest as employees. What we'll be bringing back next month as we talk about this is what can we do with health insurance? Are there ways that we can still provide the same level of benefits to our employees, but at a lesser cost? So we'll be exploring those types of options next month, such as minimum premiums, self-insurance funds, and high deductible plans that may be paid for by the employer. Another one of the areas that's largely talked a lot about over the last couple of years is supplies. The biggest factor in supplies is our bus parts. And again, as we look out, we've got an aging system. That's why we're talking about buses, buses, buses. And the good news is, as we plan for this in our program, is we'll be able to meet some of the maintenance needs that we will have as the years go on. If you take a look at 18, there it is, you can see it jumps way up. And 12 years ago, from fiscal year 18 in 2006, we acquired 47 buses. This is what Brad has been talking about the last few months. So we need to kind of plan for a smoothing out plan and for the maintenance to extend the life of the buses. And the challenge will be able to do so. What I wanted to do is take a look at the operating plan here for 16 through 20. This is based off of what we know today and the forecasts and using the assumptions in your key report. As we take a look at 16, we have operating revenues of $66 million planned for next year at this point in time. That's about a 2.6% increase over this year in our budget. When we look at what our operating expenses are at $67 million, that's only about a 2.2% increase. And to your point, what we talked about in the last meeting or earlier today, do we benchmark ourselves? How do we do? We are one of the most cost-effective transit agencies in the country, but there's always room to do better. And when we take a look at the bottom line for next year, we have a deficit of $1.2 million. That deficit grows on the operating side as we go forward. So it's something that we need to address on a strategic basis. One of the things we just, whoops.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask?
Sure.
What does it mean with reserve adjustment?
If you take a look on line 11, oops, sorry, gotta get my pointers right here. There's an increase in the reserve. We have an operating deficit of the $950,000. But we have a policy that says we need to set aside 2 months of funds as an operating reserve. Because expenses increase, we must
Got
have
it.
to increase.
Thank you.
Okay,
Can I ask one other question?
sure.
Yes.
So that, and by the way, y'all knocked it out of the park with this, and thank you for bringing it forward. So this 2016 has the property tax millage increase in it and fares, or
This
not?
does not. This is
Okay.
a base case scenario. This is as we are today.
With no revenue increases?
Correct,
Okay.
other than the fact that we've got, which we'll be talking about, but the ad valorem tax is going up about 3.8% based on what the county.
Just based on the values, but no millage increase?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
What we were talking about a little bit earlier is using reserves and using it for bus replacement. One of the advantages of using local funds for bus replacement, and those funds will not cover all of our bus needs over the coming years, so we still have to look for our federal funds for that, is you don't have to follow all the federal guidelines. And when you put out an RFP, and it's out of local funds, it's probably about this thick. When you add all the requirements of the federal government, you're talking, and you're shaking your head, yes, it requires a lot of additional things, which in my mind means it probably comes at a higher cost. So what are we going to do now about doing strategic changes to meet our operating deficits? We've got some suggestions. We've got 5 things that we're going to be looking at today, and I'm sure there's plenty more we can look at. One is increasing the property tax to our maximum millage. The other one is increasing the average fare that we receive, increasing advertising revenue, implementing administrative savings, and service hour adjustments. Currently, the millage is at 0.7305. If we bring it up to the max of 0.75 mils, we would see an increase here of anywhere from $970,000 in 16, going on up to 1.2 in the year 2020.
Joe?
Yes.
Sorry. What's the possibility of having, currently there, how many cities are there that do not participate?
There are 5 municipalities that don't participate. Bel Air Beach, Bel Air Shores, Kenneth City, Treasure Island, and St. Pete Beach.
What's the possibility of getting them to participate?
Well, right now, St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island would give us some money towards other services. It just doesn't come out of the millage.
Say that again, somebody distracted me.
St. Pete Beach and Treasure Island do give us money for some of the local trolley services, but Bel Air Beach, Bel Air Shores, and Kenneth City do not. And it's interesting what Commissioner Welch had mentioned about beach reclamation and what does that have to do with public transit. I do know that the more stops that you have, which I live in Bel Air Beach, has none. And stops can be things like bike racks, and I just noticed they put in a huge amount of bike racks to be able to qualify for more money from FEMA for beach reclamation. So maybe there's an opportunity if we argue long and hard, but you laugh, so.
The bottom line is, at least according to Alan, that it would take state legislative change and perhaps even a referendum in that city.
Do a referendum?
Yeah.
Has to pass in the city. I believe that's.
Yeah.
Okay, but then you said that only St. Pete Beach, and what was the other city?
Treasure Island.
And Treasure Island. I mean, what what's the possibility of having the individual cities voluntarily help out? Like Treasure Island and St. Pete Beach.
Bel Air.
Bel Air,
Bel Air does.
it's Bel Air Beach and Bel Air Shore.
Bella Beach and Bella Shores.
Yeah. Commissioner Webster?
And I was listening intently to Commissioner Long, and I know our chair probably has the same comment, but we've been talking about this for a decade, and every time it comes up, the state senator, last time I recall, says there's no way it's going to pass the legislature. But I would be interested in the number, and I think the county ran it for us a little while ago. If they were in our ad valorem area, what the impact would be, and I think it's several $1 million.
Yeah, I think we've estimated about 0.2%, which is by our assumption. We'll just go to the next slide.
And it's Terra Verde too, isn't that correct? Terra Verde?
Terra Verde Fire District.
Right.
That is not.
So you're talking about high-value properties on the beaches in Terra Verde that aren't paying into
Yeah, it's
this.
weak.
Yet BRT is running to the beaches, to St. Pete Beach. I mean,
But they're county unincorporated, so couldn't we,
it's been an uphill battle. I think it's
okay, but
something we ought to
doesn't
talk
mean we
about.
can't work on it.
Yeah.
I mean, citizens love to go to Fort DeSoto, right?
Yes.
The one thing we can do is look at the agreement, the sharing agreement we have with Treasure Island and St. Pete Beach to make sure that we spend a lot of hours operating in there. If you take the Central Avenue trolley all the way out to the end, I don't know if we appropriately get a contribution from them.
We have it on our radar screen to visit them this year. Again, we got a 5% increase last year, and so we're going to be going out there to visit with them again.
Thank you. So, yeah, we charge those TI and St. Pete Beach an hourly rate, right? That's what we do. And like, I mean, Kansas City, I assume we have bus stops there.
Right across the street, across 54 is well.
Not in the city.
Not in
The city is across one street.
So right in the city limits, we don't though?
Right.
And how about,
East of 66th Street, none.
Really?
West of 66th Street, like at Jack Randall, all that, yes.
and then and Bel Air Beach and Bel Air Shores, and Charlie doesn't stop?
Can I just say one more thing? Look at the school board tax. It doesn't matter if there is a school in your neighborhood or in your city. It's a county-wide benefit for education, and everybody should pay into it. The same thing applies to transit. There's no reason these 5 communities should not be sharing the burden like the rest of the county. The legislature will look at it as a new tax, and that's why it's died every time we talk about it. So I support the notion, but realistically, you were in the legislature when we talked about it. So you were one of the, yes, you understood.
Well, we do know if we don't ask, the answer will be no, because we're not asking. So if we ask and they say no, so be it.
Hey Debbie, why don't you just send an invoice?
We could try.
I like that thought. It's not bad.
We'll move on. One of the other ideas that we were looking at is in the Ernst & Young financial study that was conducted. They had anticipated a 15% increase in fares, like we were looking at the average fares. Every time you raise a fare, as you well know, we lose riders. So there's an impact to that. And the impact brings us down to about the 12.5%. So, but we did look at this, and the impact is significant if we do find ways to increase. We talked a little bit about it. There's discounts we could look at. We could look at many different types of things out there. But this is something that does have a huge financial impact and a very difficult impact in the community.
So are you recommending it or you're not?
We are recommending to look at it, absolutely. To look at a 15, well, you'll see what the total impact of all these are put together and how it affects the bottom line. So that's something we are putting on the table, absolutely. It's a
One
difficult
other,
one.
going back a couple of slides, I don't want to us up, we're running behind here, but one of the issues that we didn't address in the slide, a couple of slides back, was possibly revisiting the number of discounts and the way in which the discounts are operated.
Oh, yeah, I think,
And so that's another area that probably should be addressed as we go through that
we
process.
will do that, and I think that will help significantly how we look at our average fares that we were just talking about. The next thing is on outsourcing advertising. Currently, our advertising has been done on an in-house basis here in the marketing department. And actually, I'm very proud to say they're above budget this year. They're doing a great job. But what we did is marketing, Cindy, had put together a meeting, and we took a look at what would happen if we outsourced and what are other transit agencies doing. And I think conservatively, we can increase our advertising revenue by about $300,000 next year. So we put together an RFP to see what we can do, and it'll grow thereafter. By doing this, you're getting national advertisers that we can't get readily access to. The other thing is it'll be taking and putting things on the sides of our buses, at the very top edges of our buses. I think we just need to be mindful when passengers are in there, the view out. But that could get us a significant amount of revenue with no heavy lift.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Not to try to get in the weeds, but my brain is on spring training right now. So it's just where I am living. So I was curious if, when you do this kind of thing, if you reach out to the Jays or Phillies during spring training and the buses that go through those areas, if they, I would assume they might want to. And maybe you already do that, and I don't know about it, but like I said, I'm just throwing it out there because that's where my head is right now.
Yeah, it's a great
I had a
idea.
question on that too.
Yes.
When we had a comparison between the HART and our advertising, the HART advertising is like twice as much as
Oh,
us.
yeah, theirs is around $600,000.
Yeah. But the thing is that they have to pay to the people who are getting the advertising for them. So if they're paying, say, a third of what these people are bringing in, so they're bringing in 600,000, but they have to pay maybe 200,000 to get them to do that. So what they're getting is really 400,000.
Actually, it's a net amount that they should be getting. You do, obviously, the advertisers make money on the fact that they're doing this for you, but it's the net amount that comes to you. And the other thing is a guaranteed minimum, so that we're guaranteed a minimum amount every year of, let's say, $300,000. So anything up and above that, we would also get.
So the people who are doing the actual advertising and soliciting it are guareeing us.
Correct. And what I did in my previous job was I asked for all that money up front. So I would get a big check at the beginning of the fiscal year to put in the bank.
You go, girl.
And how would it work?
It's a smart woman for you.
How would it work with what they sell?
I'm sorry?
How would it work with what they sell? Don't you get a,
It's basically we're getting the commission off of what they sell.
yeah.
And with the guaranteed minimum, let's say for us 300 or 400, it could be 400,000, whatever it is. And anything over that dollar amount, you come up to an arrangement of what percent over that dollar amount you get and what they keep.
Yeah, it's usually, the contracts are usually set up like guaranteed minimum, and then anything over and above that is like 50 or X%
Yeah.
of revenue.
So they'd be doing this on top of what we're already doing? Or they'd be
No,
doing
we would be turning it over to them. It's to do 100%.
And that's significantly more than what we've done in the past for advertising, so I mean.
Last year, it was in $100,000. This year, they've done a great job in the marketing department, but I think we'll still be around 270, maybe 300,000.
If we add that trolley by the Blue Jays, I guarantee you they'll probably buy advertising. Just
Are you
saying.
taking notes, Cindy?
Just saying.
Could y'all just send us the advertising policy? I just want to.
That's one of the things that we have to look at before we go out, because we want to make sure it's in place.
We have a current policy though, right?
I believe we do. I'm sitting shaking.
Can you just email it to us?
Yeah.
this is one of the areas that we were looking at, is if you were to do just a 4% route adjustment, one of the ideas would be that you could have savings that then would carry forward. And again, anytime you do route adjustments, there's impacts to the bottom line, which we took into consideration. Our net savings would be anywhere from 1.2 million up to 1.5 million in the out years. Chris is going to be talking about, you know, how we take a look at these things. We are going to look at redesign scenarios. So you reallocate the resources versus just saving them. So there's multiple things we can do. If we take all these 5 things that I talked about and put it all together, what is the impact if we did everything on the list? And the impact is we're going to have in 16, if we were to implement it all for 16, $3.8 million worth of savings or additional revenues, the case may be, going out to the 5.7, 5.8 in 2020. Put that together with the earlier slide that I showed you that showed where we were at with the deficit. And now you go ahead and you see we had these $950,000, $245,000 for the operating reserve with our $1.2 million. Now we're adding, and you see some growth there that we can put back into reserves. Growth, reserves. But as you see going out, we still have some issues, but it basically covers us for the next 4 years if we implement everything on the list. And again, these are just the beginning of ideas. And we're going to be your what-if scenarios that we can do all the financial analysis.
Good job.
Yes,
So,
Commissioner Rice.
Debbie, I'm sorry if I missed this earlier, but on that slide, on the last slide, the line of increasing the average fare 15%, there's such a big jump from FY 218 to FY 219. Could you explain those numbers?
Yes, I can. Let me go back. In the Ernst & Young plan, their thought process was you take a look at your fares every 3 years and then increase it by 50% every 3 years. That's why there's a big jump.
Oh,
Another.
Another 15%.
okay.
Not every year.
No, every 3 years. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Welch.
So is your target for the cash fare going to 225? Because 15% would be 230.
What we'd like to look at is the increasing the average fare, which again takes into consideration such things as discounts, could be how much our gas fares are. Currently, our base fare is $2, and we're getting $1.06 in average fare.
Okay, so.
The average revenue.
The average revenue, yeah, the average revenue.
So do you have a target for the cash fare? Is that 225? Or you haven't determined?
We haven't really worked makeup and next time meeting on that.
Well, and that's, I know Patty was gonna ask it, so what's the TD
Yeah.
consequence of that?
I think that the LCB is looking at options on how we can look at the financial impact or lessen the financial impact to PSTA.
Sure, I could just add to that. I believe, just looking at the numbers, and Debbie can correct me, but if we just adjusted the cash fare and didn't touch the transportation, the TD bus pass, which is currently a monthly pass, which normally sells for $65, is a monthly pass for $825 for low-income individuals. And having ridden the buses a lot, people don't know the word TD. They say, I pay $825 for getting anywhere I want to go for my entire life. How dare you increase that even a penny? But if we didn't touch that and we only adjusted the base fare of $225, TD, the ridership on that $825 pass is so much, we wouldn't see, I don't even know if we'd see any revenue increase. We'd just see more people going and buying the TD pass. We have to look at the transportation disadvantage contribution because it's such a high percentage. Obviously, you know, and Ross is the expert on this. We have to be mindful because it's an incredibly important part. It is the most important part of our ridership. So we have to be very careful with this. It's not going to be easy. I know that. I'm not saying one, but we're trying to look at all options.
So there will be some TD increase.
But
Yeah.
will it be the 15%?
Don't know yet.
Don't know yet. Don't know yet. We have some members on our track riders committee that represent different groups associated with low-income individuals, and we presented to them. Of course, they're of all these 5 things, they're most tuned to that. But they understand they would prefer to have a bus come by them and pick them up than no bus, right?
I'm just thinking, looking at the TD, with a 25% fare box recovery, even a $65 a month pass is really, what is that, $250 a month.
It's costly.
So $8.25 out of that, you might ask, well, why do we even charge $8.25? And you have to go down to the strategies, and I look forward to that committee going back and really looking at the whole structure and why it's that way. Used to be the TD, we only got a certain amount of money from the state. And when the MPO was running it, and once they ran out of that money they got from the state, they stopped providing service. I think now we just, since we're doing it, we sell as many $8.25 passes as coming. So it's a big issue, big challenge for that committee, and I look forward to having that a recommendation.
Behind you all the way.
Brad, it's just that it is a huge part of what we're supposed to do that. There's a transportation disadvantage. And a lot of it depends on how much a person makes and how they're going to exist. I mean, absolutely exist without it or at increased rates. And that's what you're going to hear from that community.
I have no question. I have one more question. One of the sources where we get a lot of funding is for grants. And I remember again when we were looking at the Hart versus PSTA comparison at one point. Hart was getting a lot more grants than PSTA was. And I'm just wondering, why don't we have an effort to go out and get more grants? We could get individual people to do it, or get vendors to go out and get it for us. But it seems like an area that we're neglecting.
I think that's an excellent idea. There's so many places to go look at. Some of the grants that Hart gives is what we've been talking about, this STP money. That they get on the average, it could be 5, 8 million, 13 million. It's different every year. But I think every stone needs to be overturned and looked at, and I'm happy to dive into more grant funding. I think it's an excellent idea.
Thank you.
Chris?
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm going to introduce to you this service performance monitoring system that Brad has been speaking of. This is really staff's approach at developing a tool that is really in mind for us to use in conjunction with the work plan that you all will be developing and implementing to help assist you in providing you with the data and the information that will ultimately help you to make the best decision. I'm going to go over the methodology behind it, some of the results, and ultimately some of the recommendations, some examples of our staff recommendations that you've seen by way of the realignment scenario option 1 that you were introduced to at the February 18th workshop. Now, we presented this to TRAC, and they were, they really enjoyed being able to see what it is that we were doing to be able to help provide this tool. It sparked a lot of really good discussion, and ultimately, really, they were very supportive of it. So with that, let me get started here. Ultimately, this methodology here is a way for us to identify targeted areas for this redesign concept, and being able to identify where we are having performance issues in the system and help identify why. And identifying the higher performing routes, understanding what it is about them that's making them high performance routes, and identifying these low performance ones and trying to implement perhaps one of these categories or a combination of them to help make them a higher performing route. And then thirdly, we also have a tool that would be available to help forecast performance of a proposed realignment, plug it back into the tool and see how it would then perform against the system as we see it today. So the methodology involved 2 steps. The first one is performance. The performance is driven by the observed data that we collect on a daily basis, that we keep track of monthly, and ultimately aggregate up to a fiscal year. What you're seeing today is the fiscal year 2014 data, consisting of ridership, our hourly cost to operate the buses, and our fare revenues that we get back from the fare boxes. And from these three data, we developed the criteria by which we score, and the criteria being passengers per revenue hour and cost recovery. And those are the 2 criteria that we score to ultimately give us an idea of performance. So the passengers per revenue hour is really a ridership measurement of the performance of the route based on how many people are on the bus throughout the day. And of course, the cost recovery being a financial side. We thought it was important to have a fair and balanced evaluation of the performance of the route based on the amount of money and revenue we're getting back for the time we're on the road, as well as the amount of physical people that we're serving. Yeah.
Can we calculate down to whether or not it's a, say, a full fare rider versus a discounted rider, so that we know at certain times of the day and so on what the makeup is on the...
And that cost recovery is more or less a average of all of that. The revenue, the cost recovery is literally the revenue divided by the cost, and kind of the fare box ratio. So that takes into account all of the revenues that we take in, despite what kind of fare that we're collecting. But the fare boxes do give us reports actually on a daily basis of exactly what kind of pass is being used, how many TD passes, how many Medicare passes, how many full days. So that is taken into consideration in this. So the first step in this methodology, we're weighting the performance and the financial, as I mentioned, and we do it in 2 different ways. The first way, we are measuring every single route against every other route, regardless of whether it's a trolley, it's a jolly trolley, or if it's an express route, if it's a flex route. We want to see how they perform based on the scoring criteria, half based on the ridership, half based on the financial, against everything. We then do it a second time, and we created kind of logical categories. We want to know how the 2 express routes compare to each other, how the flex routes compare to each other. We compared the contracted Jolly Trolley services, and then the remaining 34 routes, which we just consider kind of standard local service. And those are, your 60, your 52, just regular routes. Between those 2 scores, we combine them together, we give them an average, and it gives us a nice balance of being able to compare it to how it serves against its other service type, as well as in the entire system. Our second step really speaks to kind of our core mission of being a public service. We didn't think it was necessarily fair to simply say, it's getting this much revenue, it has this many riders, and that's the only thing we have to take into consideration. I think this speaks to Commissioner Welch's point. It's very important that we take into consideration the demographics. Who are we serving in that area? Where are people going? What kind of market is it serving? And other factors, which I'll speak to in some of the examples, referring to performance history. Are there grants involved that are helping to fund certain routes? And as you can see, this is actually, it should be familiar to you, this is the continuum that you all put on, put together there at your board workshop. And certainly there's a nice balance in there in the middle, but definitely I think this reflects your desire to maintain a primary mission of providing a public service, and this step is an important part in meeting that. So once we have identified our low-performing routes, what are our options moving forward? And in developing a staff recommendation, we look at these possible categories. Can we improve it simply through marketing it better, branding it? Does it need some ongoing monitoring because it's a relatively new route? Is there a research and redesign approach? We definitely need to involve the public, engage in the public in public surveys, and reviewing some kind of origin and destination data, where people are getting on and off. If we're looking at the possibility of doing something to a route, is it a route that somebody is just using to get somewhere else, or is their final destination on that route? And that's an important consideration. The realignment or combination with other routes, that's you'll see a good example of that in here that you saw in the option 1 scenario. And of course, not something we want to do is to eliminate, but it has to be an option. It has to be on the table. There's likely to be a situation where the best possible choice really is to eliminate it and reallocate those resources to make the system better as a whole. Yes, sir.
For the research and redesign, and these various elements in there, are we going to the design or all the information that we got when we did the public transportation study that we did for $700,000?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. This, you'll see an example here in our findings that will speak to how we sort of worked with that plan to help verify that might be a best solution. I'll give a good example of that.
The community bus plan you're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So speaking to the results, so the first step with the actual data, the scoring that we did, this is what came out of it. And as you can see, everything's out of a possible score of 100 to kind of simplify the scoring process and make it easy to understand. Most of this is not necessarily a surprise. In what you see up here, we see a nice cluster of the core high-performing routes that we'd expect to see at the top. It gave us a good sense of confidence that we have a good, solid approach to measuring the performance of our routes. And then we definitely have a very concentrated group of significantly poor performing routes that this sets in place a trigger for us to look at those routes and see what we might be able to do moving forward with one of the approaches that I gave you before. So in developing this, I'm going to go through a few examples that are reflective of that option 1 scenario that you saw in the February 14th workshop. The first one being our lowest performing route in the entire system. This is the Route 444. It's really just no surprise why it's there. It's got really bad frequency, almost 2 hours, kind of at odd hours during the day. Has a very awkward configuration, and it's just not. It's hard to ride, and it's not serving the way that we would expect to. So our recommendation in diving into these steps here is to eliminate this current configuration of the 444 and research other possible opportunities. And one of those definitely being the elimination of this route and putting those funds into something that will better serve the area. And the 19 and the 52 are very good options for this area. They run right through where the 444 serves, and we could possibly put those funds into getting better hours and better frequency that would ultimately give people better access to transit in that area. And There is, of course, the opportunities to research potential community partnerships, are there other funding opportunities, those sorts of things. East Lake Connector is another one that we looked at that is way down on the list. Again, poor frequency here, and this is one obviously that came out with the other flex connectors. We've seen the other two flex connectors do relatively well. The Oldsmar and Tampa connector does very well as far as its goal and what it's serving. And the East Lake, we've just never seen any increase in performance. And just kind of diving into the research of it, we don't see that putting any additional funding into it would necessarily improve the performance of the route. And ultimately, eliminating and reallocating those funds for that into something else would be a much better use of the money that's involved in that. Now, the East Lake Connector here does have some grant funding associated with it that we could possibly look at putting into other regional express routes. We could look at putting it into the Oldsmar Tampa connector, which is the best performing flex connector. So again, staying within that category of flex services, can we take some funds out of a lower performing one and make the best one even better? And this is an example here that goes in line with the community bus plan. The 1 in the 30, we saw a very strong correlation of people riding a good 30-minute trip between Northeast Shopping Center and the Gateway Mall, Tyrone Mall. But we also saw in some of the survey data that's not necessarily where people in that corridor wanted to go in the end. And we saw that the community bus plan recommended combining these routes and actually running it all the way down the north-south corridor to downtown St. Petersburg. And that really goes in line with what the regional demand model is telling us, and what some of the other research is telling us is that that's where people want to go ultimately, is that's a continually growing destination is downtown St. Pete. So this is an example of not eliminating any routes, but actually just redesigning them. We would expect to see a significant amount of ridership growing on that corridor with those routes. And instead of going west out to Gateway Mall, there are other options in place to get to Gateway Mall that would give almost the same frequency that it exists. You just might have to make one transfer, but you could get a lot more people to downtown St. Pete that would be interested in riding this corridor. The Route 58, this is an example of a historically low-performing route. It's been cut before, and it's one of those, it's sort of slowly been cut in frequency over time because of poor performance, and again, is another example of us not seeing any pluses in putting more money back into it that we would expect if we put it at its old frequencies before the cuts, that we would expect to see anything particularly positive out of it. And it was also, again, a recommendation from the community bus plan. So we sort of validated what they suggested. Now there are some, one specific location in serving St. Pete College, which is by far our largest participant in our UPass program, and it's one of their biggest campuses. We could consider just rerouting the 18, and actually that has more service. It has more frequency, more hours. It would serve the students better anyway. And then we could reallocate those funds from the 58 back into something that's higher performing. Another recommendation from the community bus plan that we saw great potential in is the combination of the Jolly Charlie North Coastal Route and the 66, and giving it 7-day service, more frequency, and just a combining good, relatively low-performing services that could give it really good potential in serving the growing tourist economy on the coast there. We have the Safety Harbor Jolly Charlie that would be able to connect to this, so it would really give a really good connection between Safety Harbor and the beach cities. And again, it sort of validated what the community bus plan had already had in place. So this hopefully gives you a good introduction to the way in which we're going about and evaluating what we currently have and how it will assist you in moving forward with a work plan in the future once you have a better idea of exactly the direction you want to go. So. Yes.
I don't know who the chair is now.
You just left. I guess I'll step in.
You're in
Please.
charge here, as Alexander Hicks.
That's dangerous.
Very thoughtful approach. Let me ask you a question on the dollar savings from the elimination of the routes, and I'm, you know, they're obviously justified from what you said, but do you have a dollar value for the routes that we eliminated? Isn't most of the cost, as we said before, the driver? So how much are we saving, say, from?
So for what you've seen right here, in these recommendations and what you saw reflected in that scenario is about 1.1 million a year. And that's operational. And there's, we have 5 buses as well, we would say.
So that's Route 444, East Lake Connector.
58 and the 30 and 1 redesign.
So all, was that 3 or 4?
Yes, it's 5 total.
So 5 total saves us about 1.1 million? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I also agree it's a very thoughtful approach. And I'm assuming that we'll be looking at these kinds of things regularly.
Yes, again,
As we go
the comment,
through.
none of this has been approved. It's sort of the output from this suggested model. I'm suggesting we first work on sort of the policy levels, and we will get into this.
Okay, so
Yeah.
really today is more about the model itself, and you're showing an example of how it could be applied.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and it seems to be, you know, we'll see as it goes. Again, I think in this model, and I think you're kind of doing that, but the economy, economic development should be as one of the considerations.
Yeah.
But since you have the coastal route of Jolly Trolley up there, I'm going to make a comment, since I take total ownership of that. I really like the idea of the 7-day-a-week thing. We've been driving for that. It is, for North County, something like that is really important. I think we've learned that North County loves it. It's been extremely successful. Taking it to 7 days a week, I think, is important from an economic development and tourism. Tourism should be built into that. Really important. I would just add as you're looking at this, I don't know what happens when you replace a bus service with trolley service. I don't know how that affects people with the air conditioning, the windows. I mean, I just don't know. So I'm sure you will advise us on that further.
Absolutely. I think sort of the thought in this was that potentially it could turn into a South Coast Beach trolley
Right.
bus.
The one thing I do want to add, again, something that we have talked about along the way, is whenever we do make a change to that route, all those cities have to buy in. I strongly feel that the trolley, and we've talked about this, can make a loop by the Toronto Blue Jays Stadium, and should, from an economic development standpoint. It's 2 blocks off the beaten path, so you're only talking a minute or 2 each way. So I just throw that out there. And if you're thinking about doing this, are you still looking for the cities to contribute towards this?
To be discussed.
To be discussed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't have it.
Haven't gotten that far. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, it was a great presentation, very thoughtful. I would like, when you bring it back to us, though, if in each one of the routes that you're talking about, changing or eliminating, if you could just put a little map in the corner that allows us to visually see where you're talking about, because some of us that are on the board may have some knowledge about a future development or future economic opportunity that's going to be dramatically affected by that change, and it'd just be really nice to clearly know. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And just to piggyback off of Commissioner Wong, very briefly, I know Commissioner Jones has a comment too. If possible, it would be helpful to know if we are eliminating or otherwise dramatically changing what type of replacement or supplement would be perhaps made to adjust for those people currently served by Commissioner Jones.
In the qualitative assessments, did you consider the land use density along the route?
Yeah, as an economic driver, that's certainly important. If you know, I know Clearwater is doing a lot of land use redesign along 19 and in that area and downtown Clearwater, and certainly I think that speaks to your point in understanding what potentially is going to be there in the future. That's very important.
It is precisely the same point, that if you add service on a route in a dense area, then you get more density in that area, which allows you to run it more frequently and it becomes more successful.
Commissioner Welch?
Just a question on the community bus plan showed us that we have two distinct demographic groups that we serve. For the fixed routes, it's folks making, what, less than $25,000, but for the trolleys, it's over $50,000. So I'm assuming a lot of tourists are on that. I don't know if we've ever actually quantified that.
Not directly, but the surveys, no question, support that.
So given the conversation that we're having about the tourist development tax and the county's ability to have another cent there, have we ever even approached the TDC about some support for the trolleys where there's a clear connection to tourism? Have we ever thought about that? Or wouldn't be a huge subsidy, but if it's supporting tourism, I think that's a natural
I think we
Make a
absolutely
motion.
should.
ask. So,
You could make a real argument for that.
but we have to have the data first to
Yeah,
say,
I love
you know,
that idea.
50% of the riders are tourists. So how will we get that data?
Well, we do have, you know, the community bus plan has a very good survey that we've sort of dove into, looking at origin and destination, but I think that's something that we need to visit and consider in future surveys that, you know, we have some required plans coming up that we may be doing surveys for, and we should consider building that approach into that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jones?
In other places that I have been, the concierge always has a bulletin on his stand of the trolley service to the different points of interest in his area. And actually, the hotels are giving out discounts, which they pay, check. The hotel itself pays the transit service in that area to provide for their guests. And
Where?
Boston, for one.
Oh, no.
I know they keep the information in Clearwater Beach when we were developing this particular route. They were some of our biggest supporters, were the concierge group from the hotels. And now I don't know that they buy any of this service, but it is very inexpensive. And which brings me to another point. Not in maybe this case, but I do think, and I know there are federal guidelines, but I do think there is, especially for things that are being maybe primarily used or for fun versus work or tourist related, I think there can be a different price charged. Because I can tell you that a $4 a day, all day ride, when we get on the trolley at night to do a night trolley crawl, we'd pay 10. So I'm not saying in every instance, I'm just saying, I think, you know, we have to start thinking more creatively of what people, you know, what is the value of the product they're getting. I don't think a once a month or twice a month use of the trolley is the same price point as a twice a day bus to work. I think those are two different things, and we need to evaluate that and find ways around doing that.
Taking those kinds of ideas into consideration, implementing the smart card will give us a lot of options to be more creative in those processes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Because we had a combined meeting, I missed the public comment sector at the opening of the planning committee meeting. So is there any public comment at this point? Seeing none, is there any other business to be addressed?
We need to approve the minutes of the planning.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, at this point then, the next meeting of the planning committee will be April 15th at 10:30. The next meeting of the finance and performance management committee will be April 15th at 9 o'clock.
That's never
Oh,
good.
I'm sorry, one more thing.
Yeah, I just want one thing. In our discussion of our path forward, which is the first thing we're talking about, I have a feeling that many people in the area have no idea about how much our TD work contributes to the rest of the area. And it is such a big thing of what we do. I would think that in some place in our path forward, we might put something, it might be a little thing on the side of the bus, it might be, that indicates that this is part of a path forward type of thing. So that every time somebody sees the bus go by, they're reminded that these don't just take people one place to another, it's a very big part of the whole community.
Yeah, vital.
Yeah, but to really push it in people's face. I mean, not quite that bad.
This is the retired advertising.
Brandon, we had well, what yesterday or the day before, seniors use bus service. It was great, it was wonderful. I appreciated it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Amy Jerry.
Your first seat.
They deserve it. They played tonight.
More often.
Earned it.
I didn't mean to steal your